You've been looking into some of California's options. Does the state have any options besides these mandatory water cuts the governor has imposed?
Right. The state does have options, but they're either for the midterm or the longer-term future. You know, we're talking about these 25% water cuts right now from this past week, but that's not going to be enough. Some other technologies, as you talked about, are things like drought-resistant crops, but that, of course, is going to take years to develop. Another possibility is desalination plants. Now, one is coming up over the next few years. It was actually mothballed in the 1990s, and another one is coming up, I believe, in Carlsbad, California, to the tune of about $1 billion. But again, this is going to take a long time coming, and we just don't have that time right now.
And still only meeting a fraction of the state's or the city's water needs in that case, right?
With Carlsbad, it's only about 7% of San Diego's water supply. So we're going to need about, what, 12 more desalination plants to reach that city's water supply.
Jay, they can't just truck water in?
It's very expensive to do that, just like it's expensive to desalt seawater.
So that's, as far as you're concerned, that's an inviable option?
You can truck water in for small communities where you're not trucking it for very far, but otherwise it's a lot cheaper to do additional water conservation for big metropolitan areas or to do wastewater reuse and treatment, those kinds of things.
Jay, I think it helps if, you know, we sort of present the California problem in stark terms. And one way to look at it is to evaluate California's agriculture industry or certain crops against the value of other industries in cities that rely on a lot of water. I tried to do, well, I did a little bit of research this morning and came up with a couple of figures that I want to throw at you and see what you think. The almond crop, among the most water intensive in the state, is valued at about $5 billion annually. Hollywood entertainment is valued at about $50 billion annually. If you suck Los Angeles dry, clearly that's not good for Hollywood.
Well,
should we be framing things in these terms?
Well, I think you have to be a little more careful in the sense that about half of all the urban water use is in California, which is 2 or 3 times the average for the rest of the United States, is for keeping our lawns green because we have a very dry summer in our climate here in California. So there's a lot of room for urban water conservation before you start to bite into the major industries.
Hey, Jay, it's Ramy here. Sorry. I just want to ask you a question about the crops that are being used over in California. A lot of these are very thirsty crops, including, as Eric, you talked about almonds. It actually takes 1 gallon of water to make 1 single almond, and they actually produce rice in California, and they're sending that to Asia. So why are these even allowed to be grown in the state?
Well, because you make more money per drop. What's really relevant is not the tons per gallon, but the money per gallon. These farms are all businesses, and so they do a lot better if you allow them to grow the most profitable crops.
Jay, why aren't Californians more at war with each other over this issue? The folks in San Francisco and Santa Cruz, and even Sacramento for that matter, use vastly less water than their peers in cities like San Diego, or worst of all, in a place like Palm Springs.
Well, I think the prices need to be set about right, and that'll provide the right incentives for people to use less water or use water more appropriately.
So in other words, if you priced water the way we price gasoline, let's say, it would create the kinds of incentives to drive more appropriate behavior regarding the use of water?
That's correct, and particularly in the agricultural sector, we're looking at trying to improve water markets so that water can move from lower value crops to higher value crops.
Are your typical Californians respecting these restrictions, abiding by them?
Oh, I think they will. We're still at the end of our rainy season today. In fact, today we have a little bit of a rainstorm here outside of Sacramento. So I think we'll see as it gets warmer and the water utilities start enforcing things and coming up with their pricing structures for the drought that we'll see. On balance, the governor's orders will be complied with, and agriculture will continue to see the very large shortages they've seen for several years now.
You know, Jay, in my research, I was finding that Americans use some of the most water per capita in the world. One figure that I came from the CIA World Factbook was 1,500 cubic meters of water per person per year. But relative to people, say, in Europe, in the United Kingdom, and in Germany, that's only about 200 or 400 cubic meters of water per year. So what's the difference? What are we doing wrong, or what can we do even better over here in the U.S.?
Well, some of it is just different kinds of accounting of water use. for urban water use, we in California tend to use a lot relative to other parts of the world and other parts of the United States because we have a very dry summer, and we like to have East Coast landscapes on the West Coast where we have a dry summer. So that requires a lot of watering. If you're in the middle of a drought, we can pretty easily cut back urban water use quite a bit by restricting lawn watering without really much harm to the core of the economy. However, if you go to rural areas and you have mandatory cutbacks on some of the rural areas when they don't need to anyway, then you can be imposing a lot of economic hardship without much purpose.